So I wanted to do another follow-up to my How Do We Reach Creationist video, because I got a lot of comments on the Chris Hedges section of the video that I put, and certain people seem to interpret what he was saying is that creationists are poor, and that's not quite really what he's saying. He said that he thinks that the engine of the movement is personal and economic despair. That's quite different from saying that creationists are all a bunch of poor people, and some people rightly pointed out that many creationists are quite wealthy, or at least middle class. And in the book American Fascists, he profiles one woman who, as sort of a typical example of someone who grew up with a rough life, dealing with poverty, dealing with abuse, and found emotional sanctuary within evangelical fundamentalist Christianity. And I think that when approaching these sorts of issues, it helps to understand the psychology behind it, in that fundamentalism is in many ways a reactionary movement, and that it has a highly emotional appeal rather than an intellectual appeal. And you have to deal with that emotional component when dealing with fundamentalists and creationists. If you think you can just base your approach on, dealing with the intellectual elements of it alone, then as much as a lot of people would like to stick to the rational and the factual, that doesn't always work. And I'm not saying that you have to use emotionally manipulative tactics or that sort of thing, but you have to understand that component of it to really address the issue, is what I think. And so when you look at the Creation Museum, and if you've never been to the Creation Museum and you've only heard, oh, they have, dinosaurs with a saddle and, dinosaurs in the Garden of Eden, I don't mean to pimp out my own video, but I would recommend, I'm going to post another link to it in the description, my sort of guided tour of the Creation Museum, because I showed just about every part of the museum that you're allowed to take pictures of / film. They wouldn't let you film the videos, as we found out. One of the people I was there with almost got kicked out by security, and they showed up with one of the museum people, a security guard, and a dog, like ready to kick him out because he had a video camera recording this one film that was playing. That was quite an interesting event. But okay, back on track here. When you look at the Creation Museum, there's one particular part of it where the part showing, it starts out showing science and evolution versus creationism and how they're just differing views, but then towards the middle of the museum there's this hell in a handbasket scare tactic sort of thing. It's very emotional. The most of the museum is fairly brightly well lit and nice, but then you go into this dark room that's sort of like a pseudo ghetto, and there's graffiti all over the wall, and they're trying to depict what the world is like with if people abandon creationism in the Bible. And you can see it's completely reactionary. You can see newspaper clips of Terry Schiavo and that whole debacle, and school shootings, and they're trying to say that if we don't believe these sorts of things, then, society is just going to crumble. These are integral to the maintenance of society. And so people's fears and anxieties over all sorts of different social issues are part of what drives this movement. And within the Creation Museum, they show a sort of 3D cutout of the Scopes trial. Now, as I mentioned in the creationist video, one of the main the attorney, William Jennings Bryan, the other attorney was Clarence Darrow. Both of these men were incredibly famous at the time as lawyers. They're probably the two most famous lawyers of their day. And William Jennings Bryan was, I guess you would say, the Ron Paul of his time. He was this populist political figure, ran for president several times, gave the very famous Cross of Gold speech, where he argued that the bankers in the East Coast elites were destroying the little people and the farmers in the heartland of America by being on the gold standard, and we should adopt, we should allow silver money and have, a gold silver standard, because it's very populist, and you still see these things at work today. So aside from his sort of populism, and there's some strange connection between right-wing populists and investing in gold, like when society collapses you're going to want gold. I would think you would want, I don't know, maybe guns, ammunition, portable water, food, but apparently what you really need is gold, because you can barter with it or something when society collapses, and it's supposed to be a good investment even though it's a commodity that fluctuates along with every other price on the stock market. But let's not go into that. All right, what I'm getting at here is that there's a definite link between populism, social reactionism, and a lot of these sorts of fundamentalist evangelical points of view. William Jennings Bryan blamed World War I and the slaughter of World War I on the teaching of evolution. This is what happens when people believe that they're just monkeys. And you can see those words echoed by people like Ken Ham. It is a reactionary movement built on fear of the modern world, and also of many of the concerns of, I guess, modern society and what they call the atomization of society and the breakdown of community. Now that we're all living fairly separate, I have no idea really who my neighbors are. I hardly ever interact with them. And this, as opposed to, say, the Middle Ages, when people lived in close-knit communities, everyone knew everyone else, and probably be horrible in my opinion, because there's too many busybodies in the world for me to feel comfortable in that kind of society. But some people in their atavistic imagination think that the rural farm life community, all these things were unmitigatedly wonderful, and if only we could go back to them. And the world is falling, the modern world of cars and telecommunications and high-tech warfare is, everything's going downhill. Of course, not only fundamentalists believe that. See, I'm starting to ramble here because there's lots of different things going on sociologically, I guess you would say. But you can see these trends of reactionism within creationism, and it's part of a much larger view. And when Chris Hedges, and again, I don't entirely agree with Chris Hedges. I think he can be a bit of a doomsayer, to say the least, and his points of view on religion and what he thinks God and religion are, I don't agree with it at all. I think he's playing word games and being wishy-washy, I guess you would say. So I don't entirely agree with Chris Hedges, but what I do think that he gets right is that he sees that these are connected to historical trends, to things within society itself. It's not merely like, I read the Bible and now I believe that the world is 6,000 years old. And I continue to believe that because of this circular reasoning, and it's not entirely intellectual is what I'm getting at. It has to do with much larger social issues. And of course, the downturn in the economy is part of it, although that's his narrative. But you can see it. Just listen to fundamentalists and creationists sometime. Listen to their narrative of the world. World's going to hell in the handbasket. The liberals and the feminists and the gay rights advocates and the secularists who took God out of the Pledge of Allegiance in the schools and banned school prayer. All of these people are destroying our country. And of course, they're scapegoating is what it is. But it's an emotional appeal of, they have these social anxieties, and they deal with that anxiety about the way the world is and the way the world is going and all their projected phantoms through scapegoating, through these simplistic narratives where, we're being lied to by scientists and the world is 6,000 years old, creates a convenient, closed system. And things like megachurches and other forms of churches offer the kind of community and the social connection that would otherwise be lacking in society. So there's much more appeal to these sorts of things than the merely intellectual appeal. In fact, I think the intellectual appeal is, 0.001% of it. So even if I don't think Chris Hedges is entirely right, I think that he strikes in the right direction in understanding that movements like fundamentalist Christianity and creationism have much more complicated roots than the merely, religion. Well, this is someone's religion and this is what they believe. And again, this is one of the flaws that I think of the Four Horsemen, is that they tend to attack religion and its beliefs without really delving into the historical and social causes and histories of these movements and have that kind of understanding. So Chris Hedges, not entirely right, but the Four Horsemen, slightly superficial. So any other thoughts that you have, let me know in the comment section, and have a nice whatever time it is.
Dobson understands, I think, the culture of the Christian right at a more intimate level than Robertson or Falwell, because he's a psychologist. He understands that behind the politics of resentment and behind the histrionics, behind the culture war, is a culture of personal crisis. So he started Focus on the Family, this group in Colorado Springs, to exploit that fact. His correspondence department in Colorado Springs handles so much mail and so many letters and phone calls from, average workaday middle Americans seeking help for mundane problems, from their child's bedwetting problem to marital strife to adultery to pornography addiction, that it has its own zip code in Colorado Springs. And when people write in, they'll receive some Dobson-approved advice, offering them some fairly conservative prescriptions for their problems. But what ultimately happens is they're entered in a database and they're bombarded with political mailings telling them that the homosexual agenda, and abortion, and liberalism, and feminism are the root of these problems, that we live in a fallen society, and once we rid our society of these problems, we'll be in a utopia and you won't be experiencing these personal crises. And so through this system, Dobson transforms crisis-racked, traumatized people into Republican shock troops